Good Shabbat. This week is Parshas Veschanan. It's also called Shabbos Nachamu, Shabbos of Consolation. That's based on the Haftorah that we read from Yeshayahu, from Isaiah, which starts off, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, comfort me, my people. And when we use the word Nachama, which we understand is comfort or consolation, we have to have a little bit better understanding of what it originally means. Because that same word is used by God when he says, Vayinachem Hashem, God regretted that he populated the earth and therefore destroyed them by the Mabul, by the flood. So that seems to be a very negative understanding of the word, translation of the word, versus the positive one that is usually suggested. But I think it's very simple. The word Nachama, regret, is really saying, change the way you think, change your perspective. So God was changing his perspective by being gracious and populating the earth with human beings. And when we ask for Nachama, we ask for consolation. We want to be consoled, to have a different perspective, to move from our focus on suffering, on tragedy and pain, and now to look forward to a future of peace, prosperity, and happiness. And this week, besides being Shabbos Nachamu, I'd like to also speak about the memory of my mother-in-law, Shirley Schwartz, who passed away 6 weeks ago. And after a number of months, we understand that the Nechama process, the consolation process, starts to begin. For some it's sooner, for some it's later. It could be a Shiva, it could be the Shloshim, the 30 days, it could be a year. But human nature is to start to be consoled. And what is the consolation? You can't really be consoled that the person passed away. The person's never coming back. My mother-in-law won't be back. But we console by we start looking at it from a different perspective. We start focusing on the positive character traits, the lessons that she taught us in her lifetime, and therefore you just remember the good rather than the suffering. You remember the simcha, the joy. You remember the pleasure that you had from her and from those things that we learned from her, rather than just the fact that she passed away and now that she's sorely missed. And I think, therefore, we'll focus on one attribute which I had mentioned also when at the funeral, but it's something that I think really somewhat defined my mother-in-law. And that is the character trait of ahava, love, which is in this week's portion. Because it says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, God, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And then in the next verse is, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha. You should love the Lord your God. And some commentaries ask, how can you be commanded? We understand it as a commandment. How can you be commanded to love God? Love is an emotion. How can you be commanded? So the Ramban Nachmanides actually says, no, you're not commanded the emotion of love. You're just commanded to do acts which are associated with love. Giving, taking care of people. Those are acts of love. And whether the love follows or not the emotion, I don't think he suggests one way or another. But that's the only thing we could be commanded. The Kabbalists in general understand that deep down we all have a connection to God, and therefore by definition we have a love. Sometimes it gets covered up by all kinds of dispositions that we have or desires that we have, and we don't realize that we have a love for other people. But deep down there's a love, I'm sorry, and I said for other people, but it's the same thing as loving other people and loving God. Deep down we have an attachment to God, and we also have an attachment to other people, as referenced in the verse, you should love your neighbor as yourself. And therefore, deep down, we all have this connection, and that connection really is a real love. We just have to uncover it. We have to make sure we take away this surface which distorts that love. That's another attitude. Another way of understanding love is something I very often quote from Maimonides, that he says that love is always associated with knowledge. The more you know someone, the more you love someone. The more you understand someone, you love them. If you know God, you love them. If you know your husband or your wife or your children, you love them. Now, it also says you should love your neighbor kamocha, like yourself. And again, I often say this, that unless you know yourself and understand what you're all about and what your needs are, you can't really appreciate it in somebody else. So I'm going to take it back to a discussion of my mother-in-law. One thing that everyone noted about my mother-in-law is that she was full of love and giving to other people. She was someone who just loved to give. And giving is exactly what Nachmanides says is the mitzvah, the commandment of loving, is to give. And the question is, where does it come from? So a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I traveled back to Texas, where my mother-in-law was born and raised and lived for the first couple of years of her marriage. And we realized, looking at where she lived, that after she got married, they weren't that well off. They struggled. And my mother-in-law always held different jobs. My father-in-law held many jobs. They made sure that they pulled through. And thank God they were able to have a house, have a life, have children, put their children through school. But it didn't necessarily come easy. And you think about people who are gracious, oftentimes the people who could afford to be gracious. You have, you give. But it's only someone who realizes the need that people have, that the love and the need for giving is essential to their being. So when I realized the struggles that my mother-in-law went through, you realize that she understood what it was to have needs. And therefore she was willing to give and share whatever she had. It wasn't necessarily enormous amounts of wealth that she was sharing, but she shared what she had. She never came empty-handed to our house, to our children, and we heard stories during the shiva where she was giving gifts to many different people who you wouldn't think she was even connected to. So she had what you would say was that Kabbalistic understanding of love. Deep down, she had that emotion, but she also had a knowledge of what it was to have needs and to appreciate somebody else, to appreciate the value somebody else gives to you. And therefore she had a knowledge of people, an understanding of people, which gave her love, gave her the ability to love and to give. And therefore I think that's something that should bring us and the family and anyone who knew her a nechama, a consolation. We have a different perspective. Instead of focusing on the pain and the suffering, the fact that she died somewhat suddenly, she didn't have a long drawn-out illness, and that's very difficult sometimes for family sort of to take in and to be easily consoled. But as time goes on, we have to realize that the value is in focusing on those positive aspects that Shirley Schwartz taught us, that my mother-in-law taught us, that she taught her children and her grandchildren. And that sense of loving other people, of appreciating other people, of knowing other people's needs, and doing acts of kindness is something that hopefully will carry on. Anyone who knew her children, grandchildren will carry on, and that will be the legacy that she has. And hopefully she'll be remembered, and not hopefully, she will be remembered always for those acts of kindness that were really part and parcel of her identity. Good Shabbos.